What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to Celio's Network. Today we're doing the San Diego Regionals 2019 meta discussion. It's coming up this weekend, as well as a foreign special event and a foreign regional, I believe. So we're specifically looking at the North American meta, but some of our thoughts may pertain to the foreign regionals as well. So this past weekend was Daytona Regionals, and I actually have three guests with me here today who all did pretty darn well at Daytona. Um, Drew actually won the event. Will Jenkins got top eight, and then Tanner bubbled at ninth. But still, all great accomplishments all around. And so I'm happy to have them here and to hear their thoughts on how the meta is going to change going into this upcoming weekend. Will, then Tanner, then Drew. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves?
How's it going, everyone? My name is Will Jenkins. I'm a player from the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. I write for Team Rocket's Hideout, and I'm sponsored by Queen City Gaming. I just took home a top 8 finish in Daytona Beach, where I was dethroned by Mr. Drew Kate here, and then I have some other day twos and a top 4.
Awesome.
Yo, it's Tanner Hurley. I just aged up into Masters this year. I've been playing for 8 years now. I just got top 16 at Daytona after getting bubbled out by Drew Kate. Yeah.
Cool. And Drew.
I'm Drew Kate. I'm sponsored by the Card Guys. And this past year, I've had two. I'm sorry, I'm thinking. I top 8 at Collinsville, top 16 at Madison, top 16 at Knoxville, top 4 at Richmond, and won the Daytona Regionals.
Awesome. I'm glad to have you all here. So let's get into talking about what's going to happen for San Diego. So, like we said already, Guardian won Daytona this past weekend. Was Guardian actually a good play, and what needed to happen for it to perform well? So, usually I'm not asking this kind of question about the deck that won the event, but I feel like Guardian, nobody was thinking that it was going to win the event going in. So let me get the perspective of someone who did not just win with Guardian. Will, what do you think? Was it actually a good play, and what needed to happen for it to perform well?
All right. So anything I say about Guardian means zero offense to Drew in any way, shape, or form. I personally, going into the event, I did not respect Guardian as a player, and I didn't expect it to perform as well as it did, or even win the event. 2 top 8s. Basically, I really didn't expect it to do well at all, and I personally don't think it was a great play. But Xander and I and the other people that played ADP didn't play Lucario Melmetal, so that became a good matchup for Guardy. Malamar was a good matchup for Guardy, which many top players bring. I don't think your Doll Stall matchup is very great if they play around the Omastar, but like a lot of the top players brought decks that didn't have a great Guardian matchup. So I think that in retrospect, it was an alright play, but still the general player base brought the decks that were expected, like Reshizard, Baby Blonde, Pidgey, and other stuff like that. So personally, going in, I don't think it was a great play, but looking back on what actually did well, I think it was all right.
Cool. Drew, what do you think about that?
So, I actually, like, going into the tournament, was feeling pretty confident about Guardian. I actually think that it has a really solid matchup spread, and a lot of the matchups that people think are harder for the deck, Amistar solves pretty well. And I feel like my list was like well-rounded enough to the point where I'm either going in like a best of 3 format. I'm gonna be either tying or winning against my harder matchups. And then stuff like Ability Zard we tested a lot against, and we found out that the matchup ended up being favorable after we teched for it. And then also I was expecting, so I decided on playing the deck because I felt like it would end up doing really well day 2, and then day 1, I was expecting to play against a multitude of decks, and since my list was so teched out that I would end up having like a pretty good day 1 because I would just be hitting a bunch of different decks. So even if I played against like a harder matchup, I still had a chance to like uh potentially outplay it because it day 1 you might not be playing against like a top level player,
Mhm.
or I could just take the loss or take the tie
Yeah.
in day 1.
Yeah, it makes sense. I agree with what you said about day 1 being like a whole array of decks, but then day 2 actually looking pretty good for Guardian if it got there. And the stats kind of back that up. So there were 21 Guardian in day 1, and 2 of them made day 2, and both of the Guardians that made day 2 made top 8, which is pretty wild. Tanner, do you have any other thoughts on Guardian?
Yeah. So before this event, at first we had Faba and Mewtwo. We were choosing to respect the deck. John didn't think the deck was worth teching for, so we eventually just decided to take the techs out, and I ended up hitting 2 of them this weekend.
Ooh.
But it's funny because at every standard event I've hit like minimum of 2 or 3 Guardian. So I guess I just always hit the Guardian.
Did
So
you hit
maybe
both of
not
them in
playing.
day 2?
No, I hit Dean in day 1,
Oh, that's
and then
right.
I
That was
hit
on stream, right?
yeah. And then I hit some other guy playing Guardy. He didn't make day 2 though.
Okay. So Tanner, I'll start with you here. Do you think
Oh, I
Guardian?
was gonna
Oh,
add something.
oh yeah, go ahead,
Sorry.
Drew. Go for it.
So that was another thing that I thought about, like going into the tournament, is I felt like people were like kind of disrespecting Guardy and like not necessarily like teching for it, and
Mm-hmm.
it was kind of going under the radar. And as I was testing it and like realizing that it had all these good matchups when you add in the Amistar, that I was thinking that it would be a really solid play because people would be not teching for it or not expecting it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I thought ADP was going I thought ADP and Malamar looked like really solid plays as well for the same reason. Like people were disrespecting the crap out of those decks.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I liked Ability Zard the week before, and why I think Ability Zard ended up doing really well because it was like had that surprise factor and the unpreparedness. So like those kind of decks that are kind of sneaking under the radar, if you can actually make them work on other levels, they're usually pretty good. So go ahead.
I'd also like to add that I don't think it's a coincidence that the 2 players that made day 2 and then eventually top 8 were Dean and Drew. Drew's been playing Guardy for quite a while, and so is Dean. So I don't think that's a coincidence.
Mm-hmm. Like it's not just the deck carrying them. Like, yeah, to be a good player and a good deck kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Tanner. So, do you think Guardian can perform well again this weekend?
Honestly, I think there'll definitely be some in day 2 because I think it's going to be a high quantity of people that decide to play the deck since it just won last weekend.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's also going to be a lot more people that take the deck more seriously now, and people might start to tech for it more. So I don't know. It could go either way.
Drew, what do you think?
I feel a pretty similar way. I feel like a lot more people will end up playing the deck because it did do well. But at the same time, I feel like people will be prepared for it, and if people are going to play Guardy, they have to be prepared for the fact that people will be prepared for it.
Yeah.
So it could be riskier. I still think the deck is pretty solid, but it doesn't have that like surprise factor anymore,
Mm-hmm.
and so it could not end up doing quite as well as it did.
Yeah, I feel that. Anything else on Guardian before we move on? All right. Will, so ADP Keldeo was considered an underwhelming archetype by a large part of the community going into this tournament. So I acknowledge that the lists were much more refined this weekend with the variant, or at least the list that Xander started out with, and you played a very similar list. But aside from the list being better, are there external factors that caused ADP to be good for the weekend?
Sure. So when I going into this week, I was testing like ADP Cragganal Absol build that I believe got second place in seniors. And the main struggle that I had with ADP overall was its Mewtwo matchup was like pretty rough, but I knew that since Abilities Art had just won and then Mewtwo also got second, I knew that counter decks to those would start popping up, which is why Malamar increased in play. And I felt that with ADP, now that we had a better idea of what the meta was, because in Brazil we were kind of going in blind, you could refine your list in a way, but like you said, it's not about the list. It's just I expected more decks that ADP kind of feasted on to show up, and that just happened to be the case. And since Xander, and then eventually I was able to figure out a way to make your Mewtwo matchup not that bad, and then going in with a matchup that was really only just an issue was being Reshizard, it just kind of like made a lot of stuff go in the right direction. So the increase in good matchups and finding a way to beat Mewtwo, which was a struggle before, just made the deck so much better.
Sounds good. Drew, any thoughts on that?
The like Rosa engine ADP seems extremely solid. I definitely was like sweating a lot more like when I was playing against that version of it. Like especially like in finals, like that set was actually like pretty close. And it wasn't like completely one-sided towards me. I think that it could have like gone in Xander's favor if he wasn't having to like play around the fact that he only had 2 reset stamps, because there were situations where he had to hold on to the second reset stamp. But that whole engine is really, really strong. And I was one of the people who was kind of like disrespecting ADP, so I wasn't actually expecting it to do well. I say that, and I have a tech for it. I was expecting to play against a lot of it, but I didn't think that the deck was actually that amazing. But
yeah, I know what you mean. So
it proved itself to be that amazing.
You thought it was going to be more like the deck you feasted on to get into day 2.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tanner, how do you think ADP's looking for San Diego?
I mean, it seems pretty good. I like the Roses stuff a lot. When we were testing ADP, it seemed like a theme deck. It just was not going very well. But now that I see Xander's engine and Will's engine, it seems like a pretty good deck. And it was giving, I never hit either of you, but it seems like it gave John some trouble when he played against it. So it seems pretty good.
Don't get me wrong, the deck still is a theme deck.
Yeah, it's still a attach pass. Hope you don't knock my guy out. Except now, if you knock the guy out, you have a counter gain in Rosa.
Yeah. Rosa just adds another dimension to the deck. It's still a theme deck.
Yeah. Will, so are you going to San Diego?
I am. I just purchased my unbelievably expensive flight yesterday.
Nice.
So
how does ADP look?
It's a deck I'd play again. I really enjoyed playing it, and this isn't so much like a complaint about the format kind of thing, but when I played Mewtwo in Brazil and when I've been playing like these welder decks, I really don't get the same enjoyment that I did getting from playing Pika. Basically, just like non-welder decks versus welder decks, I preferred playing non-welder decks.
Yeah.
And when I was testing ADP, even though it was losing to welder decks, it still felt a lot smoother than playing a welder deck, and I felt like I got less frustrated.
Makes sense.
Hands and stuff. So it's still a deck that I consider a top deck. It's a deck that I would now consider a comfort deck. And going into the weekend, if I can't find something that I think is better, it's definitely a deck I'd play again.
What matchups do you, or what decks do you want to not gain popularity if you're going to play ADP? What decks are you most afraid of?
So like Daytona aside, I'd prefer if Reshizard didn't get hype, because that matchup is very, very poor. And I got extremely lucky to beat the one I did beat. And then Guardian as well. I know it just won, but I'd prefer not to dedicate the 1 card slot to Lucario Melmetal. And even that, it doesn't do like, it helps, but it doesn't make it an auto win by any means. So, but Daytona aside, I'd prefer if Guardian as an archetype didn't get more popular. And then the Baby Blounds Pidgey deck, I played the one of Cyrus in my deck to help that matchup. And it was more of a late night, I need a 1 card counter that might work. So I played a set of it, 2-0 Baby Blounds, and that's how that card got in the deck.
Okay.
But going forward, that might be a card I cut. So I wouldn't want Baby Bombs to rise in popularity if I cut that. But like
Got
those
it.
are the real main three.
Cool. So Tanner, you played Mewtwo and Mu tag team this weekend. Do you think it got better or worse after this weekend?
Yeah, so I played it in Brazil as well. Our list in Brazil was not very good. We didn't play Jirachi. John did decent with it. I know he got, I think he got like top 64 with it. Um, but it just didn't feel very good. I lost 2 win-and-ins with it. So it just kind of fell apart to stamp. But now with Jirachi's, it feels a lot better. It draws better, smoother. And I don't feel like I take any bad matchups with it. So I
Mhm.
think it's just one of the best decks in format still. Um, Compared to everything else I've tested, I like it the most.
Would you consider respecting Caldeo GX or respecting Guardian after this weekend?
Yeah. I made sure. I mean, I teched for it. I had turret for Keldeo.
Right.
I had uh, the Zard GX, the Rushy Zard.
Hmm.
So I made sure I had outs to both of them,
Okay.
but definitely respecting Guardy more this weekend.
Cool. Um, Drew, what do you think about Mewtwo and Mu after this weekend?
I think Mewtwo and Mu is like always going to be like a really strong archetype. That card's just like insane, and it's hard to not see it being like playable, like very playable.
Yeah.
Um, and there's like so many ways that you can like play that deck. It's insanely flexible. So if there's one like specific build that isn't gonna be too favored, you can kind of opt for a different build.
Right. Will, you've worked with Mewtwo a lot, and I know you said you don't enjoy the welder decks as much as the non-welder decks, but do you think Mewtwo and Mu is going into a favorable meta this weekend, unfavorable meta, or does it just stay the same because it's Mewtwo?
Um, I think that Mewtwo gets better. Um, so like I'm still in the belief, despite not playing Mewtwo and whatnot, and it not winning, I'm still in the belief that Mewtwo is like the best deck in the format. And there's some competition for it now with all the new decks on the rise. But like the deck has done, or the card, I guess, has done so well since its release, and it's like won pretty much, or it won a majority of the majors, and then
Yeah.
got second at the inners. Had a top 8 appearance, and then Tanner got 9th. The deck is still just very good, and Mewtwo as a card can be adapted to anything. So if the ADP matchup isn't that great, now I guess you can just throw some cards in there that make it better. Or if you're, basically it has so much flexibility, you can do so much with the deck, that I think it's always going to be potential BDIF, and I think it's fine going into the weekend.
Cool. Any other thoughts on Mewtwo? Awesome. So next, abilities are kind of flopped this weekend. Um, why did it go from winning LAIC 2 weekends ago to being almost non-existent in day 2 this past weekend? Who wants to take this one first?
I can.
Okay, go ahead.
So I actually wasn't expecting abilities are to do very well. It's actually like a really hard deck to pilot. You have to do so much like micromanaging of resources, in my opinion, to play it perfectly. And I felt like a lot of people would just like see that the deck won and then just like pick it up and try to play it and then not end up doing super well with it. Uh, so I figured it would have like a low conversion rate to day 2.
Or any other thoughts on ability?
Yeah, I think it's in theory, when you look at the deck, it looks really good. But hitting welder every turn is quite a feat. Um, so I think, in my opinion, I think it's just worse than other welder decks. And I think it did well in Brazil because not as many people were expecting it. People kind of just scoffed at the deck, maybe.
And Robin piloted it, so
Yeah, and then
he probably played
yeah,
it pretty well.
yeah. And if Robin's playing, he's definitely playing it well. So I think the deck thrived on all the lists just being suboptimal at the point.
Yeah.
Same thing happened at Worlds, in my opinion. The
Hmm.
decks were super suboptimal, so Ability Zard was able to just do well in the meta.
Yeah, nobody expected Nine Temptations gusting every turn at Worlds, and then everyone kind of forgot about it again for LAIC.
Yeah.
Will, any additional thoughts?
I personally think the deck sucks. Like
Yeah.
in theory, it should work. It should be great. It should be all that.
Yeah.
And then I completely agree with you and Tanner, and maybe Drew mentioned this. Like Nine Temptations in a format where people were like, "Oh, custom catcher doesn't exist anymore. It's just Great Catcher," was so good.
Yeah.
And Robin being a top player, the deck catching people by surprise, and I don't want to chalk it up to like luck or anything, but maybe Robin just had a good weekend. I mean,
Yeah.
anything's possible with the deck.
No,
But,
yeah, I listened to the Limitless podcast, and I listen to bits and pieces. I usually listen to it either when I'm waking up or falling asleep. But I remember him saying something along the lines of, like he kind of like just went in with Ability Zard. Like it wasn't this big mastermind plan of Ability Zard's gonna like it's the perfect meta call or anything, right? It was just like Ability Zard's good. It's pretty consistent. It's aggressive. Let's do it again.
Yeah, they didn't like any other decks, so they just decided on playing a comfort deck from the previous format.
Yeah, makes sense. So let's move on to Malamar. Personally, I thought it was like really, really good for this past weekend because of the disrespect, just like ADP was, and just like Guardian ended up being. How do you think Malamar is positioned for this upcoming weekend? Will, we'll start with you.
I'm not gonna lie, I don't think I'm a very good pilot with Malamar, but I do understand how the deck operates and whatnot. Going into this weekend, I honestly think it gets way worse. Guardy winning that should increase in play. ADP doing well should also make it increase in play, and then our list in particular is just overall better against Mally than the regular like Great Catcher thing going on. I also expect Pidgeotto to receive a lot more play going into this weekend. So if Pidgeotto players play one Champions Festival and the Malamar player doesn't play Katron's exact 60, or if the Pidgeotto player just plays two Champions Festivals, like the matchup is so good for Pidgeotto. So I highly doubt, or like, the Faba is kind of there, but assuming people do copy Katron's list, all you gotta do is play two Champions Festivals and you're chilling. So I think the deck gets a lot worse this weekend, but if you can hit the good matchups, just like any deck, you'll go far.
I tend to agree with you. Like just Guardian winning would already make it seem like kind of a bad meta, and then Guardian winning and ADP getting second, and the ADP list being like this new spicy creation kind of, like all signs point to a lot of bad matchups for Malamar.
Yeah, and like going forward, if I sit down across an ADP, they flip over Jirachi, bench ADP, do their thing. I expect it to be the deck that Xander and I piloted. Like I'm not expecting three great catchers and stuff. I expect like customs to be shown at some point. So going forward, I definitely think that that's going to be the new trend.
Earlier, before sitting down to record this, I exported your list to PTCGO, and I hit two exact mirrors in a row. Either it being mirrored into your list or mirrored into Xander's list, but very similar lists. So that was pretty funny. Any other thoughts on Malamar, Drew, or Tanner?
Yeah, I think Malamar's a terrible deck. It's funny because before every regionals, I sit down and there's like a 30-minute period where I build Malamar, I open a hand, and then I'm like, this is why I'm not playing this deck.
Yeah.
It just feels so bad every time.
So your thoughts on Malamar are more internal, like you just don't think it's too consistent.
I played when I was playing Mew with 0 counters for Malamar, I was still beating Malamar because the deck just was so bad.
I agree with Tanner. Like, it's wild. So like that's why I kind of put the disclaimer that I don't think I'm very good at playing Mally, because every time I try and test it, I chalk it up to like this hand just sucks, and then Katron, the god that he is just like, nah, bro, you're playing the deck wrong. So like honestly, it's kind of a toss up. I hate the deck. I hate playing against it. I hate everything about it, but I still respect it.
yeah, I think the only person I've seen that can play Malamar that doesn't just disrespect it so much is Katron, because he plays it very correctly.
Yeah.
And it's actually a very hard deck to play, especially with tag damage and spread damage.
Yeah, that deck is a lot of micromanaging for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of math.
Anything else on Malamar before we move on?
I just wanted to say that I think that there will probably still be a lot of people playing Malamar because a lot of people really like that deck.
Mm-hmm.
It may not have like an amazing conversion to day 2, and also it was kind of interesting seeing like the Ultra version become a little bit more popular after it had like disappeared almost.
Yeah, it was funny because like several different groups brought the Ultra version. So, um, my friends Alec and Arlo,
Yeah.
they both took Ultra, and we were talking about it. Like I'm not sure if it was the night before or 2 nights before, but I started like messaging Arlo like, bro, I think Mally's the move. Um, and he sent me his list with Ultra. I was like, yeah, I definitely approve of this. And then Danny and Pramawat also played Ultra in their deck, I believe.
Yeah.
And then I think there were
hit,
other Malamar decks with Ultra too.
I hit Alec. I think like the third round. I know Igor and Joe played Mally too, but they dropped pretty early. I think they got the classic Mally hand.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, it was cool seeing the Ultra come back in place of the Espeoxys. What did Katron play Espeoxys?
I
Does
think he
anyone know?
did.
Not positive.
I
I
think
can
he
check
did.
real quick.
I think he did. Anyway, moving on from Malamar. Um, so next deck I have is Florges Dolls. So half of the DDG crew brought dolls. Um, this deck is kind of like an outlier for me. I don't have too much to say about it because I haven't tested with it or against it. I've never really tried building it much. What is any thoughts on dolls? How's it going into this weekend?
So Dulls was actually my second pick going into Daytona. I think the deck's really solid, and I feel like it'll probably adapt to like Amistar and like the counters that people uh like have for it right now.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely like a lot of like room for like text and stuff.
Will, what do you think about dolls? Any additional thoughts on the deck?
I'm under the impression that if I was not playing the deck I was, that Dolls probably would have won the event.
Yeah,
I
if you guys
farmed
all
them.
didn't go in with that deck, right? Because
Yeah,
like I
no,
think you all
no,
took
just like
down dolls.
my list in particular, like Xander's list can lose to Dolls if they're able to clear vision turn one or turn one, turn two before you altered,
Okay.
and then um you can knock out the Cryogonal and then do your thing. So like, but my list in particular played the double Cryogonal. The Cyrus Prism wasn't super important, but I mean, it just even then it was like a nail in the coffin. The combination of custom catchers, Giraffe Rig, double Cryogonal, and Cyrus Prism just made that matchup like pretty much unlosable for me. So just like my list in particular, if Xander had hit, as many dolls as I did, it's possible that, or Xander, me, Rahul, it doesn't really matter.
Right.
It was possible that they would have hit clear vision, eventually. So maybe more ties or losses could have come out of it. But just like my list in particular had such a good matchup against it that I went 4-0 against it.
Nice.
Yeah, 4-0. So
Now
just like I was farming it at the top.
Xander was only playing the one Cragganol. And I believe Franco played a fishing rod.
Yeah.
Okay, but not everyone played a fishing rod, right?
Yeah, and fishing rod isn't like as good as the second Cryogonal because something that the DDG guys came up with is just like aggressive Belelba to try and get rid of the resources. So if you can hit the Cryogonal in Xander's deck um, before it gets searched out, like you can win and stuff.
Got it.
So with Franco's list, you can't search fishing rod,
Yeah.
without Stellar Wish. Where like at least with Cryogonal, you can communication into it and just chill with it in your hand, and now it's safe for the rest of the game.
Got it. Last deck I want to go over real quick is Pidgeotto. Jesper Erickson did get 12th with it, I believe. That was the highest placing birds. Do you think it should have done better this past weekend, and how do you think it looks for the upcoming weekend?
Last weekend, I think it was not a very great play. There was a bunch of ability zard running around, a bunch of baby Blounds running around. I think Jesper's list looks like a mess. One Jirachi was quite interesting to me, but I think given the right matchups, Pidgey can thrive pretty well.
I think it speaks to the power of the deck that it got 12th in a meta that was questionable for it.
Yeah. I think going into this weekend, the deck is super powerful. Gains a lot of like better matchups, and then the Malo and Lana kind of just beats Kragan on ADP, so that's cool. Like I don't really agree with Jesper's list, but with some tweaks and keep the Malo Lana, add Champs Fest. I think the deck is really solid going into the weekend. I've tested a lot of Pidgeotto, and it's usually a deck that I plan on playing and then don't play because I get scared.
Yeah.
And just like I never am too sure with my list whether or not it's perfect. But I think that going into San Diego, I know that there's quite a few groups and people on it. I personally like it. It's a deck that I don't plan on losing to this weekend.
Cool. Okay, so my last question to wrap it up, and then we'll go ahead and do shout outs. What do you think will be the most popular decks in day 2 of San Diego Regionals? And what deck do you think has the best chance to win the whole tournament? Will?
So far, I think San Diego will probably follow the meta trend that the other two events have had. I would expect ADP to have, like, it didn't have a great conversion in LAC, but it was also huge because it was an IC versus the regionals. So I expect ADP to have a pretty good conversion rate going into day 2. Past that, I mean, I think it's kind of up in the air. The West Coast regionals usually have a different meta than East Coast regionals. It's just kind of been that way for a while. Like in Portland, we saw a ton of Turbo Dart come out of nowhere compared to the Richmond meta. So I think that the meta is kind of just going to be a toss up of what is different about West Coast and what they prefer to bring. But for at least just like one opinion, I think ADP will probably have a pretty good conversion rate going into day 2, and then the rest is kind of up in the air. There's a lot of decks that could do well.
And do you have a favorite to win the tournament or to see in finals?
See in finals, I could put Pidgeotto, or maybe that question is better for top 8. I think that I could see Pidgeotto in top 8 for sure. If I were to put a deck that could win the event, honestly, I think ADP could just bring him back, or Mewtwo. Probably Mewtwo, actually. I think Mewtwo is just the best deck still. And the person that draws well with it, builds the correct list for the weekend, will just go far. So I'd put Mewtwo at winning the event, ADP in finals, and a Pidgeotto in top 8.
Sounds good. Yeah, I tend to keep Mewtwo just slightly over ADP in the BDIF contention just because Mewtwo has that high roll potential that ADP really is lacking. Drew, what do you think the most popular decks will be in day 2?
For the most part, I agree with Will. Just like the immediate like standout decks to me are ADP and Mewtwo. And I'm not quite sure about the rest. I do think that like Bird and like Control and like Stall decks will still be really, really strong. And there will probably be like a fair amount of those in day 2 as well.
Cool. Tanner, I'm going to change it up on you. What do you think you'll see in your 9 rounds of day 1 in San Diego?
I think I'm going to see 1 or 2 Guardian, probably a Mally, 1 or 2 Mewtwo, maybe an ADP or 2, maybe a Baby Blonde, maybe a Pidgey thrown in there, maybe a Doll. So I probably said like 10 rounds, but
no, you're good.
around that general trend.
No, yeah, I feel that.
1 or 2 of everything, or maybe 3 of something.
And do you have a favorite to win the tournament or to find itself in finals?
I think Mewtwo is the best deck in format.
Cool.
For sure.
Awesome. Go ahead and do shout outs. Drew, then Tanner, then Will.
I just wanted to shout out to my team, the Card Guys. Thanks for supporting me.
Great. Tanner?
Yeah, shout out to the Silphco for sponsoring me.
Awesome. Will?
Shout out to you, Luke, for bringing us on. Shout out to my sponsor, the Queen City Gaming and the PTC Geo Store. And then check out my articles on Team Rocket's Hideout. Whenever I post, I usually post one before every big event.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for being here, and to everyone watching, I hope you enjoyed this meta discussion. And be sure to check out flipsidegaming.com, where I write weekly free articles, and also my sponsor, potownstore.com, where you can get just about any PTC geocodes, and they have instant email after purchase. I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.